All right, welcome to the final lecture on the meaning of life, where we will cover objective naturalism, the final view. And just a reminder, I get these from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. You can see the link to that on the first lecture in this series. So let's talk about Susan Wolf's objective naturalism in her article, I believe it's called The Meaning of Life. So here she is. She's a philosophy professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And what she says is to have a meaningful life is to have a life of active engagement in projects of worth. Active engagement in projects of worth. What is it to be actively engaged by something? This is like where you're gripped by something, excited by it, involved by it. So think of someone who really loves sports. They're really just excited by it. They're talking about it all the time. This is what it would be to be actively engaged in something. And it doesn't have to be like this over-the-top exuberance. It could be a sort of lifelong sort of commitment to some project. Or it doesn't even have to be lifelong. It could be a couple years or whatever. All right. And then projects of worth. This is an objective matter. She doesn't think that anything counts as... She doesn't think that anything and everything would count as a project of worth. So number one, it comes in like projects of worth come in degrees. So something can be more worthwhile than another thing. For example, designing a building probably we would say is more worthwhile than, counting rocks or blades of grass for no reason. And then, so it comes in degrees. And then the test of worth is at least partly independent of a subject's ungrounded preferences or enjoyment. So whatever you prefer or whatever you enjoy doesn't determine whether something is worthwhile. She thinks that it's not a subjective matter what determines the worth of something. And so the standard for worthiness of a project would be sort of just, this is the way reality is, that like helping the poor is worthwhile, whereas counting rocks for no particular reason is not worthwhile. I mean, or at least it's less worthwhile, right? So when you bring those together, she thinks that's when your life has the most meaning. So think of a doctor who is out there saving lives, but is just like, they're over it, like they've been doing it for a while. They're just tired. They just want to go home. They're engaged in something worthwhile, saving lives, but they're not actively engaged in it. Or consider consider someone who's actively engaged, gripped, excited, involved by like counting blades of grass, right? They're just exuberantly like out there, like, just one by one counting the blades of grass, and they don't care if anyone thinks they're crazy. Okay, so they're actively engaged, but it's not a project of worth. Like it amounts to nothing to go count blades of grass. We'll bring it together and you'll see that there's a sweet, spot of meaning. So you have a doctor that's doing something worthwhile and they're passionate about it. That's when your life has meaning. So what are some examples of projects of worth? Moral and intellectual accomplishments. So moral accomplishment would be doing the right thing on a given occasion. Intellectual accomplishment would be maybe reading a book. Relationships with friends and relatives, cultivation of personal virtues. So you're honing your the virtues. You're becoming more courageous, more compassionate, more honest, that sort of thing. And then religious practice. Now, she's an atheist, so I'm not sure why she lists religious practice as something that's objectively worthwhile, but maybe she thinks has social benefits or something. But then she gives projects of lesser worth, and don't mean to offend here, but crossword puzzles, sitcoms, and video games. So if you're spending your life doing those sorts of things, you'd better look for something else to do. Now, maybe she would say like these have a place in a life, in terms of leisure, but they can't be sort of the focus of your life. Again, though, I would kind of object to that. I think, like, what if you want to make a career out of, like reviewing sitcoms, right? Is that really so meaningless? I guess what she might mean is like just watching them vegging out. Okay. So how is Taylor's account You can't really do a think, pair, share. You're watching this on your own probably, but how's Taylor's account different from Wolf's account? So you go back to the previous lecture. Richard Taylor says, your life is meaningful if you get to do what you want. Okay, so here's how it's different. Wolf thinks, yeah, if you get to do what you want, that's great, but it has to be something that's objectively worthwhile. It can't just be counting blades of grass. So Taylor would say anything goes, whereas Wolf says, no, it's going to be, there's some limitations here. And how does Wolf's account avoid the objections that we made to Taylor's account? Well, one of the objections to Taylor's account was that, like, what if you find harming others meaningful? Does that count as meaningful? And Taylor would have to say yes, whereas Wolf can say no. She would say, no, that's objectively, like anything that's harmful isn't meaningful, she could say, as an objective standard. But let's consider some objections to Wolf. Maybe you think, like, the valuable is just subjective. If you do, well, then you would have to reject her account since she thinks that what's valuable is an objective matter. And two, if God doesn't exist, then there are no objective values, or at the very least, God's existence is the best explanation of the existence of objective values. But if atheism is true and a meaningful life is determined by projects of value, then there can be no meaning in life. So I think that unless God exists, like Wolf's account fails because God grounds those, God is responsible for those objective values. God is the best explanation for those objective values. So it's called objective naturalism, meaning it's an objective account of meaning in life, but it's naturalistic. It doesn't require reference to God, but at the end of the day, maybe it does. All right, so that's Wolf's account, and this finishes up our lectures on the meaning of life.